Well, good evening and happy New Year's to all of you celebrating New Year's, especially getting into this new year. And it's going to be something really interesting to go forward with the podcast. And if you guys have any New Year's resolutions out there, please comment your resolutions in the comments. I want to hear from you guys and speak with you guys. And it's going to be really interesting getting into the new year, especially with this podcast and just getting into these crystals and stones. It's going to be really a learning experience for myself and everyone at home. And you guys have been listening to the podcast, and it's really, really cool to see that you guys are interested in the podcast going forward. And it's something that's going to be really especially unique in this field because there's not really too many podcasts out there like this one. And if I didn't mention myself before, my name is Sid Alinik. I have a page on Facebook called Fallen Hour and a podcast, Fallen Hour Radio. We talk about urban legends and all these things and culture and lore, horror stories and things of that nature. That being said, you guys, I have some interesting items on the table. So tonight we're talking about the crystal and quartz crystal. And I have a few items on the table that are kind of interesting. I have this one here that is Crystal Point, and this one is probably the coolest on the table because it's one of the purest and it's the clearest on the table. I have a golden healer, and for those of you at home who are into the metaphysical and into crystals themselves, you guys know that this one is one of the ones to look for, especially out there on the market for the crystals. This one is golden healer. I have a crystal skull. I have another crystal point, and that one is really cool and kind of scary because it's really, really pointy. And some of the things you guys can make out of these stones are interesting and amazing. This one is a quartz a candle holder. And the big thing I want to get into tonight is especially how these were used around the world and how they are still used in today's practices, especially with everyone in the metaphysical and everyone interested in this field of crystals. I mean, like I mentioned in the past podcast, like I had no idea that everyone was into these things. I had no idea that there was even a shop in Billings called Stones and Bones. And I had no idea that the market for these are huge and phenomenal. That being said, the crystals were used in culture, and they are rooted in culture so much that they would use these in their ancient practices with medicine, and these were believed to bring protection and those things around the world. So let's start with the Romans. The Romans would actually use these in their talismans, their amulets, so they would wear those around their neck. They were believed to enhance health, and the ancient Romans, the doctors in the ancient times, would actually use the quartz crystal and use these crystals in their practices for healing. And it would the Romans themselves they knew this, and they knew that this was a stone to pay attention to and a stone to incorporate into their culture and into their practices, especially inside of their home and in their life. So they would actually use these for protection going into battle, and that is how much they believed in the crystal, is especially going into battle and going into extreme battle with their battles. So they would take these crystals, and I believe that they would put them on their breastplate and they would carry these with them, and it was said to bring protection, and especially that lends to credibility to today's metaphysical community, is that people use these especially for protection till this day. And I know that you're not going to battle, but it's just one of those stones that lend protection to your home. It brings clarity, and it's said to bring clarity. And especially in the metaphysical realm, people would place these in their homes. You would place these in that room that you would want to sit and think about. I've read about, and I've heard people would use these also for their plant life. So to flourish your plants, you would actually place this on the bottom of your vase, and it would help your plant to flourish. And that's one of those things. It's just one of those things that you would use the crystal for. The Egyptians, now this is probably one of my favorite cultures in the world, because they're just how fascinated they were with the dead and how fascinated they were with life in general. And some of the practices they would practice are just really interesting. And when they would have someone that would become deceased, when someone would pass away, they took this very, very seriously, especially in their culture. So what they would do is they would go to, I believe it was a scribe, I'm not sure, actually. But they would have the Book of the Dead written. And if you guys don't know what this is, you guys can Google it on Facebook, or Google it on Facebook, Google it on Google. And we actually, at Fallen Hour, we actually did a piece on this called The Book of the Dead. We have this box that we made, and it was an actual manuscript of the Book of the Dead of a pharaoh. And they would have this made, and it would actually guide them through the the afterlife, and it would get them to their destination. And the crystal played a part in that, because when they were mummified and they were going through their process of mummification, and their basically like the funeral process of their dead, is they would place a crystal on their forehead. And this was said to give them clarity in the afterlife. It was said to guide them in the afterlife, and just like I mentioned, it was to get them to their destination. And the crystal was a huge part in Egyptian culture, especially being associated with the goddess Isis. The women wore this around their neck, and they would actually wear this close to their heart because it was said to attract love to their life. And it's one of those stones that are just so tied into culture. And there was actually an ancient Egyptian amulet found, an ancient Egyptian necklace that was found that had the quartz on it, and it also had amethyst on it and malachite on it. And those are basically the three stones that are tied into and rooted into the Egyptian culture. They believed in malachite, they believed in the quartz crystal, they believed in amethyst, and all these stones lended some sort of healing property to the Egyptian culture, some sort of properties that they would actually take these and apply these in a sense of healing, and a sense of clarity, and a sense of, like I mentioned, would be love, and with the Romans would be protection. And it lends that credibility to the stone that it just becomes much more interesting. And it's no wonder that everyone who is into the metaphysical now to this day, the crystal and the quartz crystal is tied deeply into the practices. And not only those cultures, but the ancient Sumerians would use the crystals in their magic practices. So they would actually use these for their formulas, and especially when you get into those cultures, the people who were into magic were doctors, and they would use these for their healing processes. And just like it's like a pattern through these cultures, they would use the quartz crystal and the crystals for their healing processes. And one thing to note is, in ancient Egyptian times, in ancient Roman times, and the Sumerians, they believed it to be ice. And I mean, they've never seen a stone like this before they found it. And it was believed to be ice, and it was believed to be frozen ice. The Greek word for the quartz is kristallos, meaning ice. And it's just something like it's a eternal ice. It's not melting. It's in a solid state. And that was the only word that they can tie to it that would give it kind of make sense to the stone. The Romans carved rings out of these, they'd carved spheres out of these, and they would use these for the cooling effect, especially in those hot months. So especially when you get into the summertime or the hotter months around the world, and especially in the Roman culture, you would actually be able to see the crystal in society, because it was one of those stones that gave the cooling effect, and it was kind of like a fashion thing with them. Now getting into the science realm, Sir Isaac Newton. Newton studied these stones. I mean, these were one of the instruments he would use to actually study light and color. And he would take a prism and he would have the light shine through. It actually had a story. This when I was in school, one of my favorite science teachers would bring this to the classroom, and he would use these. And I think I studied light and shadows, and his name was Mr. Wyman. He was a really cool science teacher, and he follows my page actually. And we studied light and shadows. And one of the things that was mentioned was how Sir Isaac Newton would use these to study rainbows and study light, and that there is a certain way the light hits the earth that gives us color. And that was one of the things that was used with Sir Isaac Newton. He would actually use these to study light and how color was incorporated into these spectrums and different spectrums of light. And it's just really interesting because it not only ties credibility to these healing properties around the world, these cultures around the world, getting into medicine and getting into their own sciences. There was actually a scientist who took this and created something and created findings out of this stone. It is just one of those stones that you guys want to have in your collection. And especially, like I mentioned in the last podcast, the crystals and the amethyst are the starter stone. And this is probably the starter stone because it is so rich around the world. It is the volume that you find the quartz around the world is insane, because the earth is made up of 90% of quartz. And I mean, any stone you guys could find out there in the world, it probably has a little piece of quartz in it, because it is just so rich in the earth's crust. The thing about these is that even if you guys don't have these in your collection, if you guys don't believe in their metaphysical properties, if you guys don't aren't into the crystal spectrums or into this this genre of healing stones and crystals and all these things, is they're actually tied into electronics. And what they found is if you apply pressure to the crystal, is it produces electricity. And that is one of the things that people who are into the metaphysical believe in, because I mean, it's proven by science. If you apply pressure to these things, it produces electricity. And they use these in microphones until this day. They use these in computer microchips. They use these in watches, especially. They would actually craft watches till this day out of the quartz crystal, and it's because it produces electricity, and it just gives it more functionality to your watch. The big place that so if you guys are wondering about how these stones come to be, is, I mean, there is so many people out there searching for stones and who are stone hunters and crystal hunters, and it's just insane to see the culture surrounding this genre. And these are primarily a huge amount of these crystals with like amethyst and the quartz is found in Brazil. And there was actually a finding in Brazil a while back that they actually found a quartz that was 90,000 pounds. That is an insane amount of quartz. And like I mentioned in the past, they're easy to find around the world. They conduct electricity, and every rock contains a piece of quartz in it because they are so rich around the world. And one of the crystals on the table that I want to mention and that I want to give attention to is called the Golden Healer. So I'll get these out of the way for you guys. And this is called the Golden Healer. And getting into the metaphysical, this is probably one of the ones that is sought after because of the healing properties of it. And this is one of those centerpieces you guys want to have inside of your collection. And we have one on the table, and we have one available for you guys at home. So if you guys are watching and you guys want to purchase this, like I mentioned in the past, there is a section on the website that will be as seen on the podcast. That will be the bullet point on the website is we have a collection on the website going up, and it's as seen as on the podcast. So as I talk about these items, they're going to be uploaded to the website, and you guys will be able to purchase these. Now, this is called the Golden Healer, and how you tell if it's a Golden Healer is not only the color, is how they are laid out inside of the crystal formation. So there's quartz up here, and this is actually made out of iron oxide. And how you tell if it's a golden healer is because of the goldish yellowish color. Sometimes they're pale under there, and kind of a mustardy color. And they are usually under the cluster of crystal, or they are in between the cluster of crystal, and that is what is called now the golden healer. And in the metaphysical realm, these are also called the stone of success. So if you want success in your life, if you want success with whatever you are going into in your next chapter of your life, this is a stone to have. And it is just one of those things that are tied into, I mean, especially with humanity, is success. Everyone is obsessed with success. And if you guys are collecting have a collection of stones, if you guys are getting into this hobby and just so interested in these stones, I mean, this is especially one to have in your collection. And I will probably give you guys a little glimpse of some of the stuff that I have on the table, and I have a big amount of inventory that we were talking about in our next podcast of different stones that I have, and those will be uploaded. So that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, and this has been a podcast about crystals and the quartz crystal especially, and this one being my favorite. This is still my favorite. This one is really cool. I'll probably get you guys a video of that too as well. And so you guys can find us on TikTok at Stones and Bones 701 on TikTok, Stones and Bones Billings on Facebook, the Stones and Bones podcast. So you guys go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Anchor, Castbox, and those are the ones I believe we are approved for right now. I'm not sure about Apple. You guys search Stones and Bones, and you guys will find our podcast. And you guys can listen to these stories. You guys can listen about the facts about these stones. And the more important thing is, I'm thinking about possibly, hopefully, if Crystal would help me on this. I'm hoping to get together some collections for you guys, some kits for you guys to take home, some affordable kits to start you guys out with your collection. And it's going to be a really cool podcast going forward. It's going to be something really cool to watch for you guys at home. We are going to be going live here soon. I know I mentioned that in the last podcast, but it's been a crazy week with Christmas and New Year's, but we are going live, and I have some poster board I'm going to be drawing out with a Sharpie and mark all these out as numbers and selling these to you guys. And hopefully you guys are interested enough to take these home for your collection, because there is not another one like these. These are truly, truly unique items, and it's going to be really interesting. So that being said, my name is Sid Alinik, and you guys are listening to the Stones and Bones podcast.